Hi, my name is Gerhard Gschwandtner, and welcome to Selling Power TV.
Hi, Gerhard. I'm Roxy Torres, and I am with ASTD Sales Enablement Community of Practice. Tris?
I'm Tris Brown, and I'm the CEO of LSA Global.
Hi, I'm Carolyn, and I'm Customer Experience Director at Habit of Improvement.
Well, we're here today to talk about the impact of the corporate culture in the sales training environment, and we're excited to hear your thoughts on that.
I became interested in culture as a result of delivering training for quite a long time and spending a lot of time with sales training in particular. So I do a lot of work with solution selling. And so what we do at Habit of Improvement is a two-pronged approach. We start by looking at the culture of an organization or a team or a leadership group, and we move on from there to what they need or do not need to do in terms of creating a culture that they would want to work with. And then we help them to choose how to implement that. And we do our own package stuff, but we also work with external providers.
Well, our view, we take a three-pronged approach just to one-up Carolyn. We look at strategy and culture and talent, and we have measured 800 training projects, and we know that if you only do training by itself, only 1 in 5 people change their behavior. So it's really led us to look upstream at a client strategy and at their culture.
Maybe you can explain that three-legged stool a little bit more.
Sure. Well, if you think of it from a sales perspective, if you have an unclear strategy, it's pretty difficult to change people's behavior. And if you have a fuzzy culture that's not aligned with your strategy, it's pretty hard to get people to change your behavior. So the first thing we look at is your sales strategy clear enough to act? Do you know who your target client is? Do you know how you're positioned? Do you know your competition? Do you know your go-to-market? And then secondly, it's creating a high-performance environment that's unique for your strategy to get you where you want to go.
And the thing about corporate culture is that it actually touches so many different parts of the organization. You know, it's involved in your attrition or retention rate, however you want to measure that. It's involved in your employee engagement, even to the extent of whether or not a merger or an acquisition actually works out. So it's certainly important. And how would you measure corporate culture?
There are lots of different tools, and I think those of us who work in this area have our preferences and our own additions to that or substitutes for what's out there generally in the market. So personally, I looked for something which started from a behavioral point of view in terms of individual behavior and all the way through the organization. And there are ways of looking at it both quantitatively and qualitatively, and I think that's a really, really important thing, particularly for those of us working with providing the kind of services that Tris and I are both providing. You need to be able to give a board of an organization solid numbers which will let them move forward with a culture change and training, ongoing training initiative.
Tris?
Sure. Well, we look at culture on its impact on the business, so impacting performance and impacting strategy. And there's really 3 ways to look at it. One through observing, another through focus groups, and then the third that Carolyn mentioned is different surveys and indices. We use 4 different ones because culture is really unique to a company and their strategy. So one thing to be careful of is don't try to benchmark your culture against another, because a strong culture that might work for one company or strategy might not work for yours.
Is it possible to look at a company's culture within the culture? Because what I found is that there is sometimes a culture within the sales department that's a little bit different from the culture of the finance department and and other departments, so that the cultures are not really integrated.
I mean, salespeople are a different monster. So one would expect that the sales organization have just a bit more vibrant culture normally than, say, the product side or anything else, really. So competitive, goal-oriented, lots of incentives, lots of, trips and campaigns. So you see that much more in the sales world. So I would agree.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. And also within each of the teams and the divisions within an organization or the subgroups that you're looking at, you have a different leader, and the different leader will have also be setting their own goals and their own specifications about who they want within that organization to be supporting them on that. and how they want them to get there. And the degree to which they want to control it will also influence enormously the kind of culture within that team. So you could get a group of people who are being micromanaged and become very dependent and very conventional and don't go the extra mile. Or you could have a culture in a team, in a sales team, for example, where you've got someone who does the opposite, where they coach them through, they help them to set their own goals and encourage them to grow and define where they want to go as part of the strategy. Could I just say, actually coming back to one thing we mentioned earlier on, going a little bit off the box as well, is that I think that we've mentioned culture and strategy are slightly separate. For me, culture needs to be central to strategy. I can't really separate the two. And if they are separate, then I think that there's a bit of an issue, whether it be organizational or a team or a department. I don't know what Tris thinks about that.
I agree, Carolyn. I would say it's the glue between a company's strategy and their talents. And you can't really decouple any of them because we call it alignment. So ideally they'd be aligned, which goes back to your question, Gerhard. Just like in a country can have a culture, there can be subcultures within a country, there's subcultures within an organization. And I think the question is are they aligned enough to create a high-performance environment to then execute your strategy?
I want to mention an article that I read recently from HBR around the 6 components of a great corporate culture by John Coleman. And he mentions vision, values, practices, people, narrative, and place. So I wanted to get your 2 cents on what are, to your opinion, the most important components of a great corporate culture for sales.
Well, that's a good one. I think I look at 2 broad categories. I think his are fine, but I look at one is the context, and that's the organizational structure, the business processes, the practices. And if you want to change culture, those are the levers you move, and there's a bunch of things that roll up into it. Then the other side is the meaning, and that's the other thing they touch on in the Harvard Business Review article is communications and stories and rituals and norms and symbols. And I think the complication with this culture stuff is it can get really fuzzy and start sounding like HR blah blah. And the real trick is you want to measure it around performance. And Harvard Business Review also found that companies in the same industry, culture can count for up to 50% of the difference in their performance. And I know one of the tools we used looked at 5,000 corporations over a 25-year period and found there to be between a 30 and 50% difference in profitability and return on assets, depending on how you play around with those context and meaning levers.